Mr. Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Donald, and good evening, everybody. Well, tonight we'll discuss the remarkable events that took place 100 years ago today in northern France. But before that, dominating everything today is, of course, the Boris burka row. The Guardian, front page, Johnson should apologise for offensive burka remarks. May. The Telegraph, Johnson refuses to back down on burkas. The Times, May calls on Johnson to apologise for burka letterbox remark. The Mirror, spineless. No apology from scheming Johnson in burka row, but weak May won't give him the boot. And the Evening Standard, kick out Boris over the burka storm. So it's dominating everything, and there have been various politicians wading in. Culture Secretary Jeremy Wright this morning said that Boris needed to rethink his comments. He also added that he did not think face veils were oppressive. Lord Pickles was dragged out to say that Boris needs to apologise, and Lord Sheikh, who chairs the Conservative Muslim group, has said that he thinks the whip should be withdrawn from Boris Johnson. From Boris himself, we've heard precious little. But really interestingly, there's a Sky data poll out today which absolutely backs up and confirms the contentions that I made on this show last night. If you remember, I said, whatever they're saying in Westminster, my feeling is the country will not find what Boris had to say offensive. And 60% in this Sky data poll today say it is not racist to compare Muslim women wearing burqas to bank robbers and letterboxes, while only 33% think that it is. 48% think he should not apologise, 45% think he should, and 60% went much further than Boris Johnson in this poll. 60% actually want a burqa ban. So that's where we are. I wonder what Jacob Rees-Mogg, Conservative Member of Parliament for North East Somerset, makes of all of this. Jacob, good evening.
Oh, hello. Good evening, Nigel.
Firstly, very importantly, really sorry to see this horrible act of vandalism that took place at your home. I just wonder whether you had a message, Jacob, for people that behave like this.
Well, thank you. I know you've had to put up with a great deal worse, as have other MPs. I know that Jess Phillips has had terrible trouble, and it's not by any means unique to me. It's all been cleared up, and I think that people who do this conduct their form of political debate in an inadvisable way.
Very delicately put, but I promise you our sympathies are with you and Jess Phillips and anybody who is treated in this way. This is not what an active, vibrant democracy is about. So tell me, Jacob, you've obviously seen the newspapers, you've heard this row. Do you think Boris was right to say what he said in his article, or should he apologise?
I think he's completely entitled to say it, and there's nothing to apologise for. I think he is entitled to have a view on whether the burqa should be banned or not, and as it happens, I agree with him that it shouldn't be banned. I would be against banning items of religious clothing, which I don't think is something a free society does. And viewing it as a Catholic, of course, Catholic items were banned historically in this country, and it's something that tends to be done by an oppressive state rather than by a free country. So I wouldn't be in favour of a ban. And I think suggesting that a burqa is not the most elegant form of clothing is a reasonable thing to do. It's a reasonable part of the debate. And Boris was saying he didn't think it was an elegant form of dress, but he wouldn't ban it. And I think if you view it in that context, the row looks pretty synthetic. It looks to me as if there are some people who don't admire Boris Johnson who want to have a pop at him.
Well, that may well be true from within your own party, because it's quite noticeable that actually, Ken Clarke and others have made comments about the burqa, saying how strange and rather odd they thought it was. But it's been mainly Remainers within the Conservatives attacking Boris. But the point is, Jacob, there will be some people who were offended by what Boris Johnson had to say. Is it right, within the limits of free speech, to say things that cause offence to other people?
Oh, yes, of course it is. You can't have any public debate if every time somebody decides to be offended by something, you shut it down and say you're not allowed to say that. This is where all the safe spaces nonsense comes from, that you have to have vigorous debate within the confines of the normal law. you can't incite violence or do things of that kind, but that to say things which other people disagree with is how political debate needs to be conducted.
So was Mrs May right? Because she clearly took offence, because Mrs May, despite the opinion polling showing that actually 66% of Conservative voters do not think it's racist what he said, is Mrs May right to have asked Boris to apologise?
No, she's clearly wrong to have asked him to apologise.
Interesting.
And it's actually not the job of the Prime Minister to tell backbench MPs what to do. We're not bound by collective responsibility or that type of discipline. And it's the wrong approach to party discipline. The Prime Minister is, of course, entitled to expect ministers to stick to a government line, but that does not apply to backbench MPs.
No, you've made your position, Jacob, very clear on that. Now, I know you'll be at the cricket.
I will be at Lord's tomorrow.
Yes.
I hope you will be.
Well, I will see you there, of that there's no doubt. But, of course, on Saturday morning, you won't be at Lord's because Matt Fry is away on holiday and you'll be standing in for him on LBC on Saturday morning at 10 o'clock. How are you finding hosting LBC shows, Jacob?
I very much enjoy it, but the reason I'm not at the cricket actually predates being invited to stand in on LBC. It's because I'm opening the Clutton Flower Show, which is one of the great sunset flower shows, and I would definitely encourage people to go to that. Well, I'm opening it at 2 o'clock.
I mean, LBC flower shows in the constituency, it all sounds tremendous.
But I love doing the LBC programmes. They're very interesting, and the callers are so well informed and give a very high quality of debate and discussion.
I couldn't agree more. I think Westminster consistently underrates the intelligence of average people. Jacob Rees-Mogg, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, Jacob, I'm actually quite surprised how frank he was there. He said Mrs May was wrong to call for this apology. And that's the question I'm asking you tonight. Do you think Mrs May was right or wrong to ask Boris Johnson to apologise? If you think she was right to do so, please call me on 0345 6060 973. Maybe, like me, you think she has completely, once again, misjudged the mood of the country and, in particular, millions of Conservative voters. If that's how you feel, text to 84850. And do you agree that actually, in a democracy, it is perfectly reasonable that people say things that cause offence to others? Or should that kind of debate be completely and utterly shut down? I'm fascinated to get your views on that. You can do it by tweeting using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC. And as ever, you can watch us on Facebook and comment there too. I wonder what Evan, who's calling from Slough, thinks of this. Did Mrs May get this right, or did she get it very badly wrong?
Hi, Farage. I do agree with you. I don't think Boris is inciting hate. I think he is playing the media much like Trump did. Boris is effectively offending a minority group. Then he'll double down about free speech and oppression. Then he'll play himself the victim and fake news. I think, for example, suggesting all Muslims are terrorists, I think that incites hate. Dragging your feet on conspiracies targeting Jews, that incites hate. Mm-hmm. But I think because Boris is in the government, Boris is in the public eye, we should expect the media and MPs to expect him to apologise.
You do?
I think we should expect our MPs and our media to expect an apology. It's just a British thing. We would expect that. I'm not saying we should accuse him of inciting hate, but I do think we should expect him to apologise.
But isn't it, Evan? Isn't it surely? Aren't we entitled, within the rules of normal discourse, in a democracy, to say things we like, even if it causes offence to some others?
Absolutely. I mean, in the case of a politician, however, I think they need to be much more careful, and I do think an apology will be expected, both by our media and by our MPs. I think they would expect. We'd expect,
but not by the public, Evan. If this Sky data poll is to be believed, and by the way, looking at their figures on banning the burka, etc., it's absolutely in line with everything I've seen over the last 3 or 4 years. A majority of people here, far more than vote Conservative, do not think Boris should apologise.
You're right about he's going to double down about free speech and oppression. I mean, that is expected, and then he's going to play himself a victim. That is why we should just expect nothing more than an apology from him as a politician for making an offensive remark to minority, because that's what he's done. He's made an offensive remark to minority, and I don't think that's what politicians should be doing. OK,
so Mrs May was right to ask him to apologise.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Evan. Thank you very much indeed for your call. Sade is a new caller from Muswell Hill. Good evening.
Yes, hello.
Hello.
Yes. No, I totally agree with your last caller. He has apologised. Was out of order. It was imperialist. It was colonialist.
Colonialist?
It was disgusting. Yeah, it was like this old colonial, you know, he thinks he can talk about black them names, whatever.
Sade, I want this phone call and I want to talk to you. This telephone line is absolutely awful. What we're going to do is get you back on a fresh line. Alan says to me on Twitter, much as I like Jacob Rees-Mogg, I find it strange that he goes against an opinion poll that 60% of people want it banned. How can Jacob Rees-Mogg talk about free speech and then in literally the very next sentence say that Theresa May was wrong to use her freedom of speech to call for an apology? Free speech from whoever he feels it's fair for, clearly. Well, no, come on. Jacob was saying, very interesting what he said, that it is right in a democracy that people should be able to cause offence. I asked him for an opinion on whether his party leader was right to ask Boris to apologise, and he said she'd got it wrong. He said it very clearly, very boldly. That is not being against free speech. It is expressing an opinion that he thinks the Prime Minister has got it wrong. I think the Prime Minister has got this catastrophically wrong. And I've been talking today to one or two people who've been absolute lifelong Conservative supporters and donors, and they just cannot believe that she is leading something that is called the Conservative Party when very clearly the one thing she's not is Conservative. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusive on LBC, and it's now 7:15. So it's really interesting. Boris Johnson makes these comments in his Daily Telegraph column. He doesn't want the burka ban, but he does say that women who wear it look like letterboxes or perhaps bank robbers. It causes a great level of uproar in Westminster. But have a think about this. Theresa May's demanded he apologise. Listen to what Sadiq Khan said in 2016. He said, when I was younger, I didn't see people in hijabs or niqabs, not even in Pakistan when I visited my family. In London, we got on. People dressed the same. What we now see are people born and raised here who are choosing to wear the hijab and the niqab. There is a question to be asked about what is going on in those homes. What's insidious is if people are starting to think it is appropriate to treat women differently or that it has been forced upon them. What worries me is children being forced to adopt a lifestyle. Should women be permitted to cover their faces in London? ? Well, it's not for me to tell women what to wear, but I do think that in public service we should be able to see each other's faces. Eye contact matters. We should be able to see the face. So isn't that fascinating? That's what Sadiq Khan said just a couple of years ago. Boris, yeah, I know the language was colourful. I know the language was a little bit on the provocative side. But, in a free society, surely he's able to express that. What I'm fascinated by is that the Prime Minister has chosen to wade into this row, despite the fact that 2/3 of her own voters have a stronger view than Boris on this subject. I'm asking, was Mrs May right to do this? Now, let's go to Sean, who is a new caller from Durham. Sean, good evening.
Hi, Nigel, mate. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. So,
I think...
go on.
let us say me bit first, and then you
Of course.
I think he should be sacked, right?
Okay.
And I think the Tories should change their name to the Raven Looney Party. No, listen.
No, I'm listening. I'm just laughing, Sean, but go on.
I think this is absolutely ridiculous, right? He's away on holiday. He's not going to face the music until September, till all the cronies get back together again. I honestly think the Tory party, they're a bunch of half-wits.
Now, Sean.
No.
Now, hang on, Sean. Hang on. Why, Sean?
Freedom of speech here.
No, Sean.
What's the matter with my freedom of
you've
speech?
got your freedom of speech. I'm asking you why they're a bunch of half-wits.
Well, because he's supposed to be. I'm from a posh university, and he comes out with something like that, man. He's a half-wit.
Well, he may be a half-wit, Sean.
He's a half-wit.
But do you think his comments were offensive?
Of course they were.
Do you think his comments were racist?
Of course they were.
Okay.
Totally.
Okay.
Totally.
No, well, Sean, you've made your position absolutely clear. So you support Mrs May in this case?
I think he's a half-wit as well, like.
Sean, you've had your freedom of speech. That's great. Thank you. Sean thinks he's a half-wit. Sean is not alone, by the way, in thinking that Boris is a half-wit. Jan and Paul in Norwich say, "Hi, Nigel. We think she is absolutely wrong. She is so badly wrong. Nigel, yet again, May has no idea how the public thinks. She is totally out of touch, and so are some of the callers." Oh, Paul, they're all entitled. It's a free society. Freddie says to me on Twitter, "In a free society, people must have the right to adhere to whatever religious or moral convictions they consider best. But the rest of us must have the right to criticise and even ridicule those convictions." Freddie, that's absolutely right. We must have the right to criticise or ridicule each other, even if some people feel a little bit offended by it. That is what free speech is about, provided it is not inciting hatred or violence. Now, there may be some of you who think Boris's comments did incite hatred, but I haven't heard many of you say that. Let's go to the Isle of Wight, to Newport, and speak to Matthew, a new caller to this show. Matthew, hi.
Hello.
So, is Theresa May right with this, or is she just hopelessly out of touch?
She's totally wrong.
Is she?
And Boris Johnson's comments didn't go far enough, and I would have called for a countrywide ban on the burka in public places.
What is it, Matthew? What is it, Matthew, in particular? And by the way, you are 60% of people in this poll feel as you do on this. What is it in particular about the burka that really upsets you?
I don't see a difference in a burka. I'm a biker myself, and I have to take my crash helmet off in shops and petrol stations. So why should people wearing the burka not face the same punishment?
Well, I suppose the argument, Matthew, that's put is they're wearing it out of religious conviction.
Yeah, it's a iffy subject, but my argument I would have gone further with myself, and I don't feel Boris Johnson should apologise for what the British people think. And he's actually had the guts to actually say it.
Do you think Boris is going to apologise, or do you think... And I think he's going to stand his ground. I mean, what do you think?
I hope he stands his ground and doesn't apologise and replaces Mrs May as Prime Minister. OK, Matthew, very clear. Thank you very much indeed for your call. Alec is a new caller from Blythe Bridge in Staffordshire. Good evening, Alec.
Yeah, good evening, Nigel. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. So was Mrs May right to demand an apology?
Yes, and he should resign, and I'm absolutely sick of his tosh, to tell you the truth. Time and time again, when he's Foreign Secretary, he's made insult after insult after insult to various nations, and he's just planning a leadership battle against a weak Prime Minister, which I know you agree, and I'm not Labour or Tory, for that matter. I just think it's a complete ploy with Brexit, and it goes back to the Thatcher years in the 80s, the North-South divide, and now it's a complete 50-50 divide in our country, in our nation, and he's just stirring hate. And when you have the likes of Jacob Rees-Mogg on the radio, and Steve Bannon, and they've had meetings stirring hate. Why?
Well, so,
why do we need this?
Alec, 60% of the British people not only do not think Boris was racist with this, but they want to go way further than Boris. 60% of the population want to ban the burqa. Is that, in your view, hatred? I mean, is that what... I mean, so are you saying to me that 60% of the country are racist and haters?
No.
Well...
I wouldn't say that. But at the same time, it's spin, isn't it? Because, I mean, we're in a multicultural society. The world is globalised. We have to live with different sex society, which we may not be comfortable with, or may embrace. And at the same time, we need politicians. Now is a backbencher, anyway. But, and like yourself, we need people to gather the community, bring them together, and stop the hate.
Okay, Alec, do you think...
Europe,
No, listen, I understand. I completely understand the point you're making, and I've allowed you to make it. Alec, is it reasonable for people to say that they do not want to see women with their faces covered up and they feel deeply uncomfortable about it? Is it unreasonable to say that in the public sphere?
No, it's not unreasonable, but it's the way that you say it. And when you've got privilege of power and you've got an opportunity for media, and everyone wants to be around Boris Johnson. He's made it all about him.
So, Alec, if he had used different words in an article, by the way, in which he was arguing not to ban the burqa, but had he said that, had he not used letterboxes and bank robbers, had he said that for me, seeing women dressed in the face veil makes me feel uncomfortable, would you then be demanding he apologise?
Well, really, it's the wording, isn't it?
OK, no, Alec, no, listen, I think that point is a very reasonable one and well made, and I thank you for calling. On Twitter, I'm appalled that insulting someone's dress and culture is being called free speech. OK, Richard, you've made your argument, but, I mean, aren't we allowed? Don't you understand, Richard, that nearly 2/3 of the country are concerned about this, are worried about faces being covered, particularly in public places? Let's go to Shanjan, who's calling from Bradford. Good evening.
Evening, Nigel.
Good, welcome. So, should Boris apologise? And did you find his article offensive?
No, I actually found it quite funny.
Right.
Yeah, but can I just say this? I'm a Muslim.
Uh-huh.
I do not like the smell of alcohol, bacon and tobacco. However, I do believe that we should follow suit with France and Belgium to ban the burqa.
Do you? And why is that?
It's because I think that it basically divides society, and it is basically segregating, because one half of society is liberal, is cosmopolitan, and is free and outward looking. And then when you go into these communities, there's so much crime, unemployment, poverty, mental illness, and how can we get that broken? If we're encouraging people to live parallel lives, then we're never going to have a good society.
I think it's a very powerful point. No, it's a very powerful point. Can I just ask you, Shanjan, how many of your Muslim friends in Bradford would agree with that point of view?
I tend to stay in contact with those who seem to be very westernised. That's one thing I will say. I am a very westernised person, and I will say this from a personal perspective. If I was ever told by anybody, here's somebody to marry, and they were in a burqa, I would just say no.
And how many, and just lastly, very quickly, Shanjan, how many of these cases, in how many cases do you think women are forced to wear this burqa?
I'm not sure about that, but I think basically it is hardwired at a young age. And in some cases, because I've been to a psychiatric hospital, some of the women end up, feeling oppressed, and it turns out into all sorts of mental health symptoms, anxiety, depression, bipolar, psychosis, and they sometimes even end up getting sections, and then they come out looking totally different.
That's a pretty depressing tale.
That's what I'm seeing in society, and this is what I mean. And, as to those white middle-class men who are saying Boris Johnson is offensive, I would like to ask them a question. Why do you try and marry a woman in a burqa yourself?
All right. Shanjan, Bradford, fascinating call. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It is now 7:30. Well, Boris Johnson, it doesn't appear he's going to apologise. Mrs May wants him to. I think she's misjudged the mood of the country, and in particular the mood of her party and her own voters. Sky data polling showing 60% of people do not think it was racist for Boris to say what he said about the burqa. Strong opinions coming through from all of you this evening. Before I get back to that, so often when we think and talk about the First World War, we talk about Passchendaele, the Somme, we talk about huge loss of life. We talk about what looks like, in many ways, failure. So often we label the British generals as being butchers, the old story of our troops being lions led by donkeys. We very rarely hear anything positive about the First World War or about our commanders. Well, 100 years ago today, just outside a little city called Amiens in northern France, a battle started that was very, very decisive. And there's been a big service that's taken place today in Amiens Cathedral, and the Duke of Cambridge was there. This is what he said.
Today we return to learn more about the experience of those involved during the historic summer of 1918. To honour the fallen of all nations, to commemorate all those who participated in this great endeavour.
So what happened? Well, I tell you what happened, and it was us. It was the British Army and the British generals that developed a completely brand new form of warfare. Lightning artillery strikes, huge amounts of air cover, including aerial bombing and machine gunning, not just observation, and of course, tanks. Tanks, the one vehicle that could get through barbed wire obstructions and could get over trenches. From the 8th to the 11th of August 1918, the Battle of Amiens raged. The Germans took very heavy casualties, but so did we. Of the 500 tanks that went into battle that morning, by the end of 3 days, only 10% were still active and up and running. But we'd smashed through the German lines with a new form of warfare that they couldn't deal with. Field Marshal Ludendorff, the hero who'd beaten Russia, said, "It is the black day of the German army. Everything I had feared has happened here in one place. It is a reality." He knew he'd lost the war. The war went on for another 100 days, at the end of which there was an armistice. For the British Army going forward for that last 100 days, it cost them roughly 1,000 dead for every single day. But it did lead to victory. And I think actually, in many ways, what happened today 100 years ago should rank alongside the Battle of Waterloo, should rank alongside Trafalgar, should be something that every school child is taught about. It wasn't all a disaster, and even if our generals were slow to learn, boy, they got there in the end. OK, back to contemporary battles of not quite the same magnitude, I'm pleased to say. But the Prime Minister wants Boris Johnson to apologise. Was she right to do that? I think she's made a very bad mistake once again. That's my view. What does Jane, a new caller from Peacehaven in East Sussex, think? Good evening, Jane.
Good evening, Nigel. First of all, I want to agree with what you said with regards to what's been happening in France today.
Yeah.
But regarding Boris Johnson, you must excuse me because I'm my first time calling. I'm a bit nervous.
I tell you what, don't be nervous. We're just having a chat, Jane.
Okay, Nigel. Apparently, it's deemed offensive what he's said,
Mm-hmm.
and they're calling for his head to roll. If that happens, then I would suggest Sadiq Khan's head rolls as well, because it was 3-4 weeks ago when they were. They had the plimp.
Oh yes, this was the Trump, the sort of Trump as a baby wearing a nappy blimp in Parliament Square, wasn't it?
Exactly, and if that's not offensive, then I don't know what is. So if Boris Johnson has to pay the price, so should Sadiq Khan, in my opinion.
Well, of course, if we finished up completely going down that route, anyone that ever said anything and caused offence, everybody would have to resign. Jane, I do understand what you're saying, but, why do you think that Mrs May has got involved in this? Why do you think she's asking for him to apologise?
Because, in my opinion, she is frightened not to go down that route. She's frightened that she's going to upset the... I have to be very careful with my words. She's frightened to upset the lefties, shall we say. Because personally, I find the burka really offensive.
Do you?
I find it aggressive.
And do you see the burka as being a sort of retrograde step for women and women's rights?
Oh, definitely, definitely. But it's strange. I was watching on television today somebody saying that she was a Muslim herself, and how the women in these Islamic countries are made to wear these burqas, whereas here it's an opt-in rather than...
Well, Jane, maybe it is, but I just don't believe it. I cannot see how a woman wearing a burqa has got a chance of getting a job or integrating or even making friends outside her own community. I just don't believe it. Jane, thank you for your call. Anne from Surrey says, Boris is embracing populism. He's trying to take some of UKIP's territory. He's also embracing your friend Steve Bannon, as are Jacob Rees-Mogg and Michael Gove. There we are. It's all a big right-wing plot. I shake with fear at making this sensitive point, but I do wonder whether women who wear the burqa are actually far from oppressed and are actually making a statement for themselves, says Mary in Oxford. Well, Mary, if they are making a statement, and if it's some, I mean, it can't surely be about liberation. It can't surely be about equality of opportunity in society. If they are making a statement, Mary, I, for the life of me, don't know what it is. Would somebody out there please tell me on 03456060973? Tom on Facebook says, times have changed. The majority of British people say no to the burqa. Well, Tom, that is true. Robert says, personally, I hope he stands his ground on this. Of course, Theresa May wants him to apologise, but what would you expect from the appeaser? Well, there we are. I think that name that I've given is rather stuck. Julie, I think for security, the burqa should be banned. I think Boris was partly right, but he could have worded it differently. In regards to Theresa May, I believe she was in a no-win situation, as her party believes Boris's comment was racist, and therefore she needed to be seen to act. Well, look, maybe some around her in Westminster thought it was racist, like the Culture Secretary, Jeremy Wright, but Jacob Rees-Mogg was perfectly clear with his opinion. He thinks Mrs May's made a mistake in asking Boris to apologise, and two-thirds, Julie, two-thirds of Tory voters are much harder line on this issue than Boris Johnson ever was. Janet is a new caller from southwest France. Good evening, Janet.
Good evening, Nigel.
Thanks.
How are you?
I'm well, thank you for the call. So, is May right to ask Boris to apologise?
Yes, I think she is right to ask him to apologise. But for the simple reason that he is insulting women. Not because of the burqa, not because of the niqab or anything like that, which personally I am against. And as you know, in France it is banned.
Yep.
And I think that's right. But I think he should learn to choose his words wisely. He has an enormous record of speaking out of place. He has said racist things in the past. I personally don't think what he said there
has he
is particularly racist. Yeah.
I mean, Janet, because I ask you that because actually on immigration, illegal immigration, I mean, Boris is very much more of a liberal than a conservative.
Possibly so, but as Foreign Secretary, he made some awful mistakes in the past, which were, I would say, neo-colonialist in some situations, and basically in his position, he shouldn't be speaking like he does.
All right, so really, this is more about the language he's used, really, is it?
Absolutely, and also in his position, he should know better, unless he has got some sort of plan behind, whether to stir up trouble or whatever, I don't know. But, taking it on face value, I think he should have thought about what he wrote.
He did.
And he should think about what he says. And, okay, I personally don't like the niqab, and I agree with what's happening in France, that it is banned.
Interesting. Yeah, and there have been quite a few people arrested and fined, haven't there, for wearing...
Absolutely.
And I understand the law is actually being enforced. Janet, thank you for your point of view. Dave from Wimbledon says, Nigel, can you just reflect on what you are saying? The right to ridicule, ? Isn't that called bullying? No, Dave. No, I'm sorry. We have to be able to ridicule everybody, every religion, every institution. We have to have that right to satirise. We've always done it. It's how free societies work. Believe me, Dave, when it's you yourself being ridiculed and satirised, it's not always so funny, and it takes a bit of getting used to. But we have to be able to do that. And if we say things or we tell jokes that cause some offence to somebody else, I'm afraid that is it. That is what free speech is all about. Isn't that, Dave, what we fought 2 world wars for? Didn't we fight 2 world wars so that we and the rest of Europe could live in free democracies and have freedom of speech? And actually, isn't the right to offend, within certain limits, part of that freedom? Because I really, genuinely believe that it is. Let's go to Albita, a new caller from Enfield. Good evening.
Good evening, Nigel.
Welcome.
It's an honour to speak to you.
Well, welcome to the show. So, Boris, and we know that Boris says and writes all sorts of things that people get up in arms about, but was the Prime Minister right to intervene in this?
Absolutely not. He's got nothing to apologise for.
Okay. Was it? Do you think his words could be offensive to some people?
No, but it seems like there's a whole band of people just waiting around to be offended. And, when we grew up, it wasn't, you take things. People say, he wasn't even saying it to them, and he's not even for banning the burqa. So if he was talking about people who have loads of tattoos and said, oh, God, these people are weird, aren't they? They look like graffiti. Would he have to be apologising for that as well?
Well, I do wonder, actually, Abida, in the modern world, whether we haven't got to apologise for virtually everything. But no, the way you were brought up, I'm guessing, is sticks and stones may break my bones, but words may never hurt me.
Absolutely. Grow a thicker skin and stop hanging around waiting to be offended. I don't like the burqa and I'd ban it. If I walked into my bank wearing a balaclava because I've been cycling and it's cold, I suspect they wouldn't let me in.
I think you're right. Thank you very much indeed for your call. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show exclusively on LBC. It is now 7:47. Well, we're used to Boris Johnson saying all sorts of things and writing all sorts of things, but in this case, the Prime Minister has waded in and demanded an apology. Is she right to get him to apologise? And even if his words were somewhat ill-considered and did cause a bit of offence, is it not reasonable in a fair, free speech democracy that people should be able to do that without constantly being shouted down and demand that they withdraw their words? Because that, to me, is what's going on here. Let's ask Imran, who is a new caller to this show, who's calling from Barnet. Good evening, Imran.
Good evening, Nigel.
Good. Well, welcome to the show. What do you make of the Boris Johnson row?
I don't think he should have to apologise.
Uh-huh.
No, freedom of speech, he should be allowed to say whatever he wants to say. And if Muslims have a problem with it, Islam is supposed to be a religion of compassion, mercy, forgiveness. They should forgive him if they don't agree with it.
That's interesting. Can I ask, Imran, what your religion is?
I'm a Muslim myself.
Are you? Okay.
Yes.
So you see, even if he's wrong, even if we're offended, we forgive him because that's what religions do.
Yes.
Interesting.
I believe that Boris has his own agenda. He wants to get into number 10. Big deal. He said what he said. And with regards to the burqa, I can understand why some people are very uncomfortable seeing people in a burqa, especially the one with, where the face is sort of covered and you can only see the eyes. I can sort of understand that. But the headscarf, I don't understand that, because if you look at images of the Virgin Mary in churches, her head is covered. She's covered up to the neck.
I don't think, Imran. I don't think there's any serious campaign to ask women not to wear headscarves. I don't think that is an issue at all. But clearly the full face covering is.
Yes.
I wouldn't worry about that. But do you? I mean, what do you? When you discuss this with your family, do you think more and more women wearing the burqa on British streets is leading directly to worsening relations?
I would think so, yes. Because, see, we don't live in a Muslim country. That's sort of a majority. We're governed by Muslim laws, or Sharia law. So Islam also says that we have to respect the law of the land wherever we live.
Now, that interpretation is one that I'm thrilled to hear, but not everybody and not every Muslim preacher has taken that line, have they?
But it's in the Holy Book. It's in the Holy Quran, so nobody can argue with that. It's black and white.
Okay.
And it also says that, on the Day of Judgment, if a person feels that they could not follow their religion, adhere to it, in the sense that they couldn't wear the veil or burqa or whatever, they will be asked by their Creator that, was the earth not large enough for you to emigrate to another place where you could practice your religion freely? So if people have a problem with not being able to wear the burqa, they are free to go, to a Muslim country.
Imran, it's so. Listen, I could talk to you for hours. It's fascinating. Quickly, though, because lots of other people want to get on. Was Mrs. May wrong to ask him to apologise?
Yes.
Splendid. Thank you, and do come and call us again sometime. Let's go to Baker Street. Malcolm, another new caller to this show. Malcolm, has Boris made a fool of himself? Is the Prime Minister right to say he should retract?
No, the Prime Minister is correct to say that he should retract, but I would go one further. I would have him arrested for inciting racial hatred, and I'll tell you the reason why.
Oh, wow, okay.
Boris Johnson seems to think that he's got a God-given right to go carte blanche and say what he likes without any consideration of what other people might think of the words that come out of his silly gob. Now, on this occasion, he's gone a bridge too far, in my opinion, to coin a phrase, and to be honest, there's no way this guy can redeem himself other than putting himself at the mercy of the Muslim community, who are rightly outraged by this.
Well, my last caller, Malcolm, and a couple of callers before are members of the Muslim community, and they think it's perfectly within his rights of free speech.
Oh, so two Muslims have got the majority vote here, have we? I mean,
sorry. So you're speaking on behalf of the majority, are you?
I'm speaking as a neutral person who viewed this statement as absolutely diabolical.
Okay, so you think he should be arrested, Malcolm? Yeah.
Well, hang on. Let me put this into context for you. My partner's a Muslim. I would be going absolutely very angry if somebody referred to my partner as a letterbox or a bank robber.
So Malcolm, does your wife wear the burqa?
That's regardless.
No, I'm asking you a straight question. Does she wear a full face covering?
Well, if she wants to, she can.
No, I didn't ask that. I'm asking you, does she?
Well, she can on occasion. She probably has on occasion. I've been with her for 2 years. What she did before the marriage...
No, you're not really answering this, are you? I mean, and also you're showing you're far from impartial, as you said you were a moment ago. Look, the point that is being made here, Malcolm, and surely is a reasonable one, is that very many British people, in fact a majority of British people, a clear majority, are deeply uncomfortable with the practice of face coverings. And you're suggesting that it should effectively be a criminal offence to even say so.
I'm not suggesting... I think, well, fair enough, you've raised a valid point, and I think, in reality, I think what you're saying does make sense, but I've just got very angry at Boris Johnson. He seems to think that, the rules of the game don't apply to him.
Okay, well, Malcolm, on that point, a lot of people would agree with you. There is something very often about people that come from that school where they do seem to think they're somewhat above the law. Malcolm, thank you. Very spirited call. Boris has got to go. 60% of a poll. That is not the whole country. Well, look, Martin, I know that you think his comments are very hurtful, and I do understand that some people will have taken genuine offence, but I'm going to repeat this point, and I'm going to campaign on it for the rest of my adult life. In a free, democratic society, you should be able to say things that are within reasonable bounds, even if they cause someone else offence. We've gone so far down the road now of everybody being terrified of saying anything that might offend anybody, that we finished up with a bunch of politicians whose names we don't know, and we can't remember a single thing they say, because they're all scared of saying what they really think, for fear they'll be asked to apologise. This is not doing our democracy any good. Very quickly, I've got a last caller. Frank, a new caller from the Costa Blanca in Spain. Frank, good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Farage. Just like to pull you up on something. You said, when you started your conversation about this, you said 60% of Tory voters. Now it's 60% of the population.
66% of Tory voters.
You did. You said 60% of Tory voters.
I'm sorry, it's 66%. Frank, carry on.
They're Tory voters. What about the
60% of the country and 66% of Tory voters?
You said 60% of Tory voters.
Well, we're running out of time, Frank. We've got 30 seconds left. The floor is yours.
30 seconds. That's a typical of your mate Donald Trump. That's the sort of thing he would say to mislead people. Get it right. Get it right.
Oh, well, Frank, thank you very much. Goodbye. Well, I thought I did my best there with Frank, but you can't win them all, folks. But we do try. And the one thing that I have never concerned about, you can come up, and provided the language isn't bad, you can offend me as much as you want, any day of the week. It's dead easy, 0345 6060 973, and I am big enough and ugly enough to take it, I can assure you. You've been listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. I will be back tomorrow at 7 p.m. At 10 tonight, it's Ian Collins, but up next, it's Clive Bull.
Nigel, thank you.